What do you think the reality is of him retracting his comments?
Well, you've already said that there was a statement that he made, and I think you called it something about humor. So it's probably not likely at all.
I just call it, he called it.
Yes, right, right.
Just to clarify.
He also says in his response that this is not about race. How do you respond to that?
I think it is most assuredly about race because, again, we have the first African-American sitting president, the first African-American first lady, and those comments that were made reflected bestiality, relating to bestiality, relating them to gorillas, and saying something about Michelle Obama being a man and being put out in the outback in Zimbabwe and mating with a gorilla, Max the gorilla. I think that a lot of us interpret that as racist.
What would you say to students of the district, many of whom, of course, are minorities and African American children?
I would say to students, first of all, the board sets a policy of expectations for student behavior. We expect them to be civil, we expect them to be courteous and respectful of each other and of authority. And we ask them to respond when they see something that is unjust going on. We expect them to respond when they see bullying going on. We teach them to be upstanders, not bystanders to something that's happening that's wrong in their district. And I would hope that they would see the response of community members, the response that board members will make to this as being an example of how we are going to demonstrate for them a way of being an upstander. Silence is not permissible. Silence is agreement. Silence to this would be agreement to what Mr. Paladino has said. So I hope that while Mr. Paladino's actions, I think, send the wrong message to students, that we can send the right message to students that there's a time and a place for you to stand up and to confront people who are saying things unjustly and who are bullying or abusing.
So you support people who want to see him removed from the school board?
I think that people have a right, just as Mr. Paladino has a right to say what he said, just as I have a right as a citizen to make comment in response to what he said. I think people have a right to call for his resignation or call for his removal.
If it is initial reaction when you heard what he said, what was your initial reaction, Crystal?
My initial reaction was to not be surprised, in a sense, because he said something very similar in emails that he sent out in the past. But I was outraged, or I am outraged too, because again, we represent a body, the Board of Education, who makes policy about how students should act. We have expectations that we set for students about their behavior. How can we then take those expectations and say, do as I say and not do as I do? So when we have board members who are demonstrating behavior that's absolutely unacceptable, if a student had written this kind of information, had put this kind of information on social media, they would be suspended. All right. We have what's called the Dignity for All Students Act. It does not just apply to students, it applies to everyone in the district. It applies to me, every other board member, every staff member. Adults are expected to adhere to that policy, and if we're not adhering to the policy, how in the world can we ask our students to?
Do you or the board have the authority to remove him?
I'm sorry, I've got two questions on that.
Do you or the board have the authority to remove him if that's what it comes down to?
The board does not have the authority. And I thank you for asking that question because I want to make that clear. The board does not have the authority to remove a sitting board member. We don't have the authority to sanction or to censure Mr. Paladino. That is not what we can do. And so I know that people are calling again, calling the office, calling me, calling other board members and staff and asking for his removal, but we don't have the authority or the power to do that.
Who does?
The commission, the New York State Ed Department.
And anyone can submit that request, right?
Yes, anyone can submit that request.
Do you plan on filing some sort of complaint with the State Education Department along these lines of reviewing his comments and potentially investigating whether he should
think I'm going to keep my options open on that. I think certainly there are numerous possibilities that we're going to look at, but I'm not going to say at this particular point that I am going to file an complaint, but I think that we should keep our options open.
Do you intend to address this at the next board meeting?
I believe that it will be. I believe it will come up because I believe the community will want to speak on it. Whether or not it's addressed, it really is something that the board as a whole should discuss. And as I said, I haven't spoken to individual board members at this point, but I think that the board has the option certainly to bring it up and discuss it at the next board meeting.
Have you spoken to the superintendent at all?
No, I have not spoken to Dr. Cash. She's not in town. Can I make just one more statement? It looks like we're winding down because I want to say something about this pin that I'm wearing today. I wore this pin purposely because it has great significance to me, and it really relates to, I think, what we're talking about today. And again, it's a message that I want to send to our students, because as they're watching this and as they're reading what's happening, I don't want them to think that one board member represents the entire board. But this pen represents a group of African American women called the Phyllis Wheatley Club, who were formed in the late 1800s to address issues of diversity, and they didn't call it diversity then, but civil rights at the time, at the turn of the century. It's a small group of women that really made an impact in this community for African Americans. And in 1900, we had 357,000 residents in Buffalo, only 2,000 were African American. And yet these women made a significant contribution to the civil rights of African Americans because they spoke up, because they were proud, because they were courageous, and in facing much more danger to their own personal life and limb than we do today. So I wear this, and I hope students will take this as a symbol of people who went before them and talk about shoulders we stand on. I stand on these women's shoulders because they set an example for me and every other Black woman who's come along to know that we can speak up, that we have a voice, that we can make change, and that we shouldn't stay silent in the face of power and speak power to truth.
Thank you, everyone.
Can you just hold for one quick second so we get shots of the pin?
Get a shot of the pin because there was a microphone in front of it.